Good evening and welcome to the Goffstown Select Board, August 24th, 2026 regular meeting. As we start every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first order of business is acceptance and correction of minutes for the August 10th, 2026 public and non-public minutes.
I'll make a motion to accept the 8/10/26 public and non-public minutes with corrections if need be.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mark, second by Allison. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. I don't have any announcements. Anyone have any announcements at this time? No? Okay. Is anyone here for, I'll open up public comment. Anybody have any comments to make? Okay. Seeing no one and hearing no one, we'll close the public comments. And I think, Derek, you ought to show tonight.
Okay, so at tab 4A, and actually on your table when you arrive, you have an updated consent agenda. Employee status reports, you have a full-time dispatcher, this is a rehire. You have a full-time patrol officer, retirement. You have 2 full-time firefighters that are new hires. You have now 2 full-time engineering interns. This is the end of the seasonal employment period. You have a full-time truck driver resignation and a full-time mechanic assistant resignation. Cemetery rights to inter at Shirley Hill Cemetery, Section 2, Lot 62A through 64D, quite a few there. Notice of property lien for general assistance, map 25, lot 32. You have police officer appointment papers, and then you have an off-cycle betterment assessment for Lynchville-Danis Park Drinking Water Project in the amount of $1,362.24.
Garrett? The truck driver, is that the one that's transporting the trash and stuff like that, or is that some other?
No, that is not. That is for one of the route drivers.
One of the route drivers?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So does that mean we're going to be incurring overtime or something like that due to this now, or?
Potentially, as he works on rehiring, potentially.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Motion?
Motion to approve the consensus agenda as presented this evening.
I'll second it.
Motion by Mark, second by Josh. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
At tab 4B, you have a recommendation from the Economic Development Council to appoint resident Daryl Haleen as a regular member on the EDC for to fill the vacant term 2026 to 2029.
I'll make the motion to appoint Daryl Helene as a regular member of the Economic Development Council to a vacant term expiring March 31st, 2029.
Second.
Motion by Josh, second by Allison. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
At tab 4C, you have your recommendation from the town assessor. He has a land use change tax and a land use change tax warrant for map 1 lot 47-1 and map 1 lot 47. These are properties that had an approved subdivision earlier this year before the planning board.
Make a motion to approve the assessor's recommendation as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion by Josh, second by Mark. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
At tab 4D, you have the 2026 MS1 summary inventory of valuation for the town. This has a September 1st deadline with the Department of Revenue Administration. Normally when we prepare the following year's budget, we assume a 0.5% increase in value. This year we actually had 1.3%, so that's very good news for that. And we're just looking for the board to approve that and submit to DRA.
Motion to approve the Town of Goffstown assessment as presented.
Seconded.
Motion by Mark, second by Richard. Comments?
Just a question, Derek, for anybody that's watching, what does that mean for the public based upon that, that percentage versus 5?
So when we get the final tax commitment for the town, the school, and the counties, it needs to be distributed evenly across all the value. That additional value means we're spreading it out. It's really gonna only make about a penny or two difference on the actual tax rate, but that is good news.
So we're not seeing a huge amount of inflation on that, is what you're saying?
Right.
Got it, okay.
Okay, everybody else good? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
If it's all right, I'd invite Danielle up for the next few items, but at tab 4E, you have the MS 535, the financial report of the town for the year ending December 31st, 2025. Our finance director did prepare a background memo. It's in your packet. We underexpended the general fund expenditures by about 1.2%. That's very close of the appropriation. And then our general fund revenues came in about 0.5% over what was projected when we revised them in September. So what that means is we have I think we have just about $400,000 going into fund balance, and then the voters approved use of fund balance this year. So we anticipate the fund balance will be about close to $9 million when we do the tax rate setting this fall.
So, Derek, on that, because looking at this, is that money that we can put back in to offset some of the taxes?
You can. That is one of the choices that's allowed under your fund balance policy. We may recommend against that, and I can kind of touch on that a little bit once we get to the revised revenues.
Okay.
Last year at tax rate setting, we were at $8.9 million of unassigned fund balance, and now we're at $9 million. We think there may be a little bit better use of it, and I think Danielle will touch on that on the fund balance policy as well.
Okay.
I have a question under that, the little summary section says total general fund revenues came in at about 0.5% over. It says that the 0.5 represents 143,000, but then when it says the break, isn't the next sentence the breakdown? It says 107, 22, and 147, but that doesn't add up to 143. Am I just misinterpreting that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts on the revised revenue projections. So we had originally provided during the budget process our estimated revenues, and then as things changed during the year, either some revenues came in or others didn't, and so they kind of move around from categories. So the highlights are a little bit misleading in that they're showing you some of the biggest changes, but when you net them all together, that's where you're coming up to about the 143, and of that, the majority of the increase above what we were anticipating was the meals and rooms, because we just don't have that number until DRA calculates it.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Motion?
Motion to approve the MS 535 as prepared by the town auditing firm Plodazik and Sanderson.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mark, second by Allison. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
At tab 5F, you have the revised estimated revenues. This does not require the board's vote. This is brought to you as information. So in this one right now, we get a chance to revise the revenues. So when we project revenues as part of the budget process, we do that very early in the year in January. We do get a chance to do it in September 1st, and that is right before we collect taxes. So this will offset the appropriation, and the remainder will be collected by taxes. The good news is we've always taken a very conservative approach when projecting revenues in December and January, but there are some additional revenues that we anticipate getting this year. Specifically, motor vehicles is tracking a little bit higher. I know that Danielle and I talk about this every year, and we were very conservative with that last year. So we go to just under $250,000. We're revising the revenues up about $250,000. So that would be less taxes than we would need to collect from what we anticipated earlier in the year. So again, this is not something that requires the board's action, but we'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have about this.
So why are we just, we're seeing more activity, or?
Yep, so what we're seeing is higher vehicle prices, and so when the registrations are coming in or plates are being transferred, there's a higher revenue coming in. As of right now, it looks like it's tracking a little bit higher than where we ended last year. But as Derek said, we're conservative. What we really don't want to do during the budget process, and you'll see as we get into it again this year, we don't want to overstate our revenues and then fall short and have to collect more taxes than we told the voters about. So in this case, we're able to say that we're accurate, but now that we're seeing the numbers unfold and it is continuing, last year wasn't a fluke that it was high, we're able to say that, hey, there is more coming in. It automatically reduces the tax rate. When you revise your revenues, those can't be spent on anything else.
So we're seeing an increase based upon the cost of the vehicles going up.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if we're seeing the same number of cars being registered?
I don't have a total count on cars. We can check with the town clerk to see if their software can actually run reports to tell us, number of vehicles. I know that as the vehicles are getting, people are getting more SUVs and minivans rather than compact cars, that's going to change the calculation because it's all a mill rate.
I think what I'd like to understand, like when you guys do these sort of things, like we may be seeing more revenue, but we may see the number of cars kind of either staying equal or actually starting to decrease, because that should actually go into determining whether or not we're going to see a continuing trend as well.
Yeah, we can definitely
Yeah,
ask.
we can ask.
We can ask the town clerk and see where she's tracking in number of registrations, not necessarily the dollar amount.
Yeah, because, I mean, if it was, hey, we're keeping steady, but we're seeing the number of registrations going up, yeah, that's a little bit more consistency, because you know that
Right.
the economy is actually running a lot harder. Basically, if we're seeing the number go down, but the prices are going up, we may actually see the number of cars being registered may actually be going down too over a period of
Right.
time.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, we can
definitely a good
look
point.
into
We'll
it.
ask what they have for data.
Okay.
I think most of that came from registering my 2 cars this year.
By a Lamborghini. And then we are anticipating that Meals and Rooms again in September when DRA finalizes their calculation, they'll let us know. So we'll tie in that number. That may edge us up even further from this estimation of about $250,000.
Okay, no action required.
No action required on that one.
Okay. Tab, is it G?
Yeah, at 4G, you have a financial policy review. This is a request to review your fund balance policy, and there are some suggested edits, and I'll let Danielle speak to this item.
So it's almost exactly 1 year to the day that the board last reviewed this policy. At this point in time, we have a few changes, and I do have the red line for you, so it's easy to see. There was one change in the assigned fund balance definition. The definition itself hasn't changed. We just, in reviewing it, realized it was very vague, and it didn't give the full definition. This is the definition as accepted by state DRA, GFOA, and the audit firm. So this just helps explain to people what that category is and how it is used. And then the other changes you see are just updating the tables. And I made a recommendation that the board consider revising the minimum balance from a flat 12% to a range of 10 to 12%, which allows you better flexibility to adjust, with the economy without having to go into a whole change in policy as those numbers are coming in. And then I did in the memo highlight a few things that I know there was, obviously the discussion at town meeting with the petition warrant article, which talked about a 10%. So I just put some background information together for the board that explains that the unassigned fund balance is the only portion of fund balance that can be used for tax rate setting. So that's what we're really trying to address in the fund balance policy. Additionally, going below the 10% mark would cause some concerns. So I wanted to highlight those. Cash flow limitation, that's one we always talk about. If we went below the 10% mark, it really could impede the ability for us to make purchases and pay out required contracts during the first part of the year while we wait for collections to come in July. Lost interest revenue, that could be a concern. Right now, we're bringing in about $500,000 a year in interest because of the fund balance that we have carried in the investment accounts. if that fund balance dips drastically or, far below, like if we go to 8%, that would be 1/3 of that revenue that would be gone, which could have an impact pretty significantly on the tax rate.
Did you say we made $500,000 in interest?
$500,000 in interest.
In a year?
And that automatically goes towards your tax rate. That's part of the revenues that DRA absolutely absorbs. The board can't redirect that to anything else. And then the last one would be the unplanned borrowing of TANs. So if something happened and we were seeing those cash flow issues because we were carrying a lower than necessary fund balance for our community size, we could be running into having to borrow money in advance of the tax bills. And when that happens, you incur costs associated with borrowing, including bond counsel, interest, things like that. And you can't negotiate the interest like you can on, traditional bonds. This would be a tax anticipation note. The bank and the market set the rate. And you could look at several banks, but they're all going to be within 0.25% of each other. And it's essentially short-term borrowing. And that would increase, of course, the costs we're spending without voter direct say in it. So we try to avoid TAN borrowing, and historically we have done so. So those are some of the three things to keep in mind when you think about the limits and where you want to set the thresholds. But I do think that the 10 to 12% as a floor would give the board more flexibility to see what the economy is doing, return more during a year if they wanted to, or apply more towards CRFs or other ballot articles.
So Danielle, keep me honest, because I'm looking at the DRA recommendations between 5 and 17. The 8% would basically, based upon the calculations, gets us about a month. Is that correct?
A little bit, yeah, right around there.
Gets us about a month.
Yeah.
So, when we say target balance, are you really saying that that's the max that we're going to, or are we really saying that that's what we're trying to achieve?
So that's our goal from the most conservative and careful approach. Not overly conservative, but the GFOA recommendation is 16.67%, which is 2 months worth of cash flow for the general operating. And the DRA has a range of 5 to 17 because they were rounding up from the 16.67% of the GFOA recommendation nationally, but they kept the 5% floor that they have had since the beginning of time. And the reason for that is because they know that they're dealing with unincorporated entities all the way up to major cities. So they're trying to allow a range that's so wide that each individual community can take in their individual risks and determine how likely they are to need the reserves on hand rather than relying solely on their tax base.
So what is our risk if we were to make the minimum be 8%?
Well, we would be giving up the cash that's currently going into reducing the tax rate. So right now, for $500,000, you have to imagine that we're dropping 1/3 of that automatically, because we'd be dropping from a 12% minimum to an 8%, which is 1/3. Additionally, you'd be looking at potential TAN borrowing, so that's that increased cost, and it's also increased interest. So now you're kind of getting hit from both ends of your budget. You're dropping your revenue, you're increasing your costs. So collectively, you could be having an impact on the tax rate of as much as 25 cents, which is very significant on a tax rate.
I think what I'm asking is why don't we say the minimum that we ever would allow to go below is to 8, period? Why isn't there a median that we say that we want to be at, and the maximum being the 16%? We say target balance. I'm just wondering, because it really throws people off when we say target, because they think that we're all trying to strive to take as much money as possible, and I don't think that's what we're trying to do.
Right. So the reason that we aim for the target is because we're trying to stay within the best practices and what's really the long-term goal of the town for years to come. That would be the most financially secure option, and that is our target and has been historically, because we're trying to avoid all those negative impacts. As far as the minimum balance, again, if you say 8 instead of 10, you're basically giving yourself permission to drop it below, significantly below, where you're going to start seeing those negative impacts. So I think 10 to 12 is kind of a safe range where that you're hearing the advisory vote of the public that they took at town meeting, and you're acknowledging that, but you're also giving yourselves a wiggle room, because we have seen quite often that actually always, pretty much in the last 20 years when we pull the data set, that the expenses are outpacing the fund balance. And so and I say expensive not from the town, but collectively, the town, the school, the county, and the state, when you put those four factors together, they're increasing at such a rate that our fund balance is not keeping up, especially with the extreme budget cuts and default budgets we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years here on the town side. It's suppressed our budget so that the amount of money going into fund balance is smaller and smaller. In the past, in the recent past, even 5-6 years ago, we would see $1.5 million going into fund balance. Now, as you can see from the 535, we're looking at about 400,000. So if it continues on that pace as it has for the last few years, your target minimum is going to be hit just by the fact that everybody else's budget passed.
I think what I'm asking, like the wording throws me off, and I think it throws a lot of people off. Like, the target really is the maximum. We're saying that we're not gonna drop below 10 or 12 in this. Target makes it seem like we're trying to take as much money as possible. Is the wording required to be target there, or can it be maximum?
You can change it to maximum, sure.
Because I think people get tied up in that. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to accumulate as much money as possible.
Right.
We're trying to make sure that we're staying within a realm that keeps the town moving should we ever get into a cash issue and we have to actually tap into that. Right? And that general unassigned fund balance isn't just for town activities, right? It's just also, like, if the school actually has a problem or something like that, that we have to tap into that. No?
No, it's basically what we collect for their portion of the taxes. So right now, between the state education and the local, we're collecting about $37 million a year.
Yes.
And turning that over to the
them.
school. So that's $3 million a month that we're turning over, and then the county is another $3.2 million.
But that's in that calculation of the percentage.
Correct.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yes.
So, like, if something were to go sideways and we have to help pay that tax out because we don't have it,
Yep,
that has to come from there too.
yes.
Yeah.
It's not just like it's helping the town.
No.
It's helping out the entire town, and the county,
Yep,
Yep.
meaning the school system and the county too, and that's why we have that there.
yes.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a reminder, your fund balance can really only be accessed one of three ways. At tax rate setting, it can reduce only the town's portion of the tax rate, so not the other three, amounts that go into the tax rate. It can be used at town meeting as appropriated by the voters, so if you have a special warrant article that has some funding from unassigned fund balance. And then the third way is only through emergency means, where you would have to not only go through public hearing processes and consult with the budget committee and get their approval, it would also then have to go to DRA for sign off, and then eventually to the courts. The courts are the final say, and we cannot spend a penny of that money without it going through that process. So it's very, very different than the unassigned fund balance at either the school or the state level, which does not require that thorough requirement to spend.
The court is not an appeal, that's just part of the process.
That's part of the process.
I personally think we should change the word target in these documents, because
Just change the wording.
change the wording, it should be the maximum that we allow.
Okay.
I'll second Josh's motion if it's to be a motion.
Yeah, I make a motion to change that.
Any questions on that?
I don't know, I don't know that I feel as strongly about that. Why are we saying that a 10 to 12 is the minimum? Because it's not, aren't we trying to keep in between, so like 11 is actually where you would, because it's between 10 and 12. But by saying minimum, we're saying that we may go over. Is that kind of what you're expecting?
Well, that's what I'm saying, if you say minimum, here's the minimum that we will absolutely allow our budget to get to, and I'm okay with changing it to say 10% there. But I'm saying on the target balance, I think that always gets people wrapped around the axle. We're saying that's the maximum that we would ever take if we, let's just say we got a huge windfall, bless you by the way, huge windfall on like rooms and meals taxes or something like that. And like if we got to a certain point, we'd automatically want it to roll back someplace else. Whether or not 16% is the right number or not, I'm not here to argue that right now. I'm just saying that the wording, I think, is really throwing people off.
So you wanna just say 10% is the minimum?
10% is the minimum, I
Like,
think.
don't come to us for 8, we're not doing 8.
Yeah, you're not gonna drop it below there, but like on the maximum we would ever get to, like we're still below the DRA requirement as being the maximum. So, but we're saying that that's a maximum. Like for some reason, let's just say we sold a whole bunch of like, I don't know, vehicles one year and all of a sudden we had a huge windfall. Like you'd still wanna be able to return and say it would never go over a certain percentage. I think the word target throws people off because they think that we're aiming continuously to try to get to 16%. And maybe we need to get to 16%, you know, but right now, I'm not sure that that's where we need to be, is 16%.
I don't have any issues with the suggestion to change the wording. Target's not required under the GFOA language. I do have a question though, does the board want to set a target that's between there? Because I know we have historically said, here's where fund balance is and here's the target. Or do you want us to just say that the minimum is here, the maximum is here, and here's where the fund balance is each year?
Personally, I think it should be min and max, and I think that we determine the target based upon the year and what's coming up and what we have to go plan for.
Sure.
And I think we should be in discussion about how those unassigned fund balances should be used, you know, because we've used it for the road, we've used it for the fire apparatuses. There may be other CRFs that we have to take into account as well, and I think that should be part of the discussion. But we shouldn't allow it to go below a certain threshold, and we shouldn't necessarily go above a threshold.
Yeah.
Which is why I think the targeting word is like, it's a problem, because it makes everybody think that that's what we're striving for all the time.
Understood.
Can I ask you too, the unassigned fund balance that we'd be basing this 10% minimum, whatever percentage we end up at, is that calculated before or after the voters have, when they, you know, vote to?
After.
It's after, so
Yeah.
the 10% or whatever percentage is. 10 to 16% would be after the money was taken already out to give to the fire apparatus and
Right.
anything else that the voters have agreed to. The 10% is after.
Yeah, so when you go back to tab E, and you're talking about the end of the year financial report, the finance director made note that town voters approved $850,000 use of fund balance for CRFs, 2 CRFs and the road plan.
Yeah.
So after that $850,000, that's done, that has to be done within 10 days of town meeting. So that's done every year in March. We send it to the trustees of the trust fund, and then they maintain those funds. So after that money has already been taken out, we've got about $9 million left.
Okay, thank you.
I just got a general question. What we're talking about here, what we're doing, does that have any effect on the overall economic health of the town? That auditors or if we were bonding and things like that?
Certainly, it certainly does, and that would definitely be something that I'd want to discuss with the board if you guys were looking to put forward articles about bonding. In order to maintain bondable ratings, they do look at what you have for fund balance. If you're tracking too low, closer to an 8 or 10, you may get less favorable interest. Additionally, you may not get bonded, depending on the project size, versus if you're in what they consider more a safe zone of 12 to 16%. But again, that would be kind of individual by year.
So if sooner or later, we're gonna have to bond a police department or something like that, and that could make a big difference in what we pay for interest
Absolutely.
over 30 or 40 years, right?
Right.
But they don't, do they look back historically to what you've done in fund balance? Or just
No, they look
where?
at where you are at the time of
Currently.
application, because that's really gonna be the key factor in whether or not you can continue the payments.
Thank
So
you.
that means we need to plan and understand how that's gonna lay out.
Yeah, and to a point that you had said earlier, just to make sure that there's no confusion, you'd mentioned that if there was like a windfall, if we had more motor vehicle or other things like that, just keep in mind, those revenues automatically get captured during tax rate setting and applied to the tax rate to reduce your taxes. So it would have to be only something that happened in like the last month of the year that would have occurred after that tax rate setting in order for it to fall into fund balance the next year. Another tricky thing about this fund balance that I just want to make sure is clear, in the assigned fund balance where we clarified that definition, you're going to notice there's a significant lag time. So if the board approves an encumbrance in December saying, okay, we have a contract out, we've placed an order for something and it's not likely to come in until next year. We have that commitment legally, we put it on our encumbrance list. If for some reason something happens and that order isn't fulfilled, or say that PO included an estimation for labor to outfit a vehicle, and then it didn't take all of the labor hours to do the outfitting, so there's a small amount left on the PO. When that PO gets closed, it gets closed in that year, so say 25 was a PO, it gets closed in 26, it then waits all the way until 2026, end of the year. You can't reuse that money or reassign that money to anything else. And then the next year, when the audit is complete and you go through tax rate setting, that's when that money can be recognized in fund
I think
balance.
it's reclassified.
So it's almost a 2-year lag time.
Okay.
There's a motion on the table. Do you want to just repeat it if you can, so we know what we're voting on?
No problem. I'll make a motion to accept the changes to the fund balance policy with the addition of changing target to being maximum and changing minimum to be 10%.
Second.
Okay, and you withdraw the last motion that you did.
I
We
withdraw
didn't
the
vote
last motion. Okay.
for your
I'll
second.
withdraw
Okay.
mine.
Okay,
And just for clarification, we will need to change that sentence on page 2 of 4 at the bottom where it says the town shall work towards maintaining an unassigned fund balance of at least 16% to that will be the maximum.
Correct.
Okay.
And basically, I think that there wouldn't be a definition of the target for that anymore, right? Because
Correct, you'd have a minimum balance and a maximum.
maximum balance.
okay, motion by Josh, second by Mark. Any further questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
At tab 5H, you have a memo regarding capital reserve fund establishment and funding options. Danielle has done a very good job giving you a couple different options here. Option one would be to convert some of that unassigned fund balance to lower what you're carrying for unassigned fund balance and propose new CRFs in 2027. We did provide some recommendations, I think, at one of your prior meetings. We did talk about everything that came forward for the boards, but as you look on page 44, about midway down, we would say kind of the high priority, the board may want to, rather than defining a town facility or, rather than doing department by department where you have DPW facilities or town hall, you might want to just do a general town facilities. Bridge replacement and rehabilitation, again, that's one that Adam identified as part of his CIP submissions, and those are much different than any other infrastructure we have. We did put that the police station replacement and rehabilitation may be one that you want to call out separate from other facilities because you are currently working, you're going to have your ad hoc committee looking at the replacement and rehabilitation options for that building. So starting to build up a capital reserve for that. And then for secondary priority, town vehicles and town technology perhaps. But again, your options that we've kind of presented here is to convert on using some of the unassigned fund balance to make that initial deposits, or to establish them and fund them either through a tax appropriation and some fund balance, but you kind of get that mix there. Right now, we anticipate that your fund balance at tax rate setting, if you use none, is going to be just about 13.2%. That 3.2% above, you know, between 10%, that is
About 2 million.
$2.1 million.
To consider across the CRS.
Yes, if you were gonna, you know, drop it back down towards that minimum of 10%.
Okay. And on the town facilities, what are we thinking about that? Like, we're talking about maintenance, building, like,
I think it would be more the major project. In some buildings, it is gonna be maintenance, it's gonna be rehabilitation, it may be redesign. You've talked about revenue collection here. DPW, a few years ago, they had significant expansion. I think it's gonna be more the significant projects rather than just some of the ones that already live in your operating budget.
How do you go about establishing a capital reserve fund?
It has to be a separate warrant article that's presented to the voters. You need to define the purpose of the capital reserve fund. You need to define agents who has authority to expend from it, and then you need to decide whether or not you want to make a deposit into it. You can only do those at town meeting.
which is like what we did with the library last year.
Yes.
Okay.
So, on the bridge one, that one's fascinating to me. What other major bridges do we have coming besides the one that we just did?
So I know there is one on Terrell Hill Road that in last couple of years, because of one item on that bridge, was added to the state's red list. And I don't know what the status of, obviously, Main Street Bridge, he's not done significant work on that, but I would have to talk to Adam and see what he has for upcoming projects in the next 5 to 10 years for that.
Did that come up in CIP at all, Richard?
Honestly, I don't recall. I don't recall if that came up. We kind of moved through the vehicles pretty closely and not so much on the bridges.
Yeah, I think in order to do that one, I think we need to understand like sort of bridge work, how much we're gonna spend on that. Because I was looking at the bills, because Danielle, you guys have started pushing all the bridge work for, into one line, and I saw that just for that one bridge, and I know you probably haven't added all the costs in there, we're looking at almost, what, $80,000 when I saw yesterday?
We're looking closer to, well, if you include the 80,000 we used in prior year from the bridge, special funds from the state, we're actually double that.
Oh, so it's almost $160K to fix that bridge. And do we think there's gonna be more, because we just haven't gotten all the costs in yet?
Yeah, a little bit. Adam had said that there's a couple things. He said the line striping is not really worth itemizing because it'll be like maybe $50 because it's only the expanse of the bridge, when they're striping the whole street anyway. But other things, you know, the paving, and he said one more thing would be one of the portable bathrooms that was on site. So very minimal left to hit that bill, but our tally's gonna come in, I believe, right around the 180 mark.
Wow, okay. It wasn't like a super big bridge either.
I do believe it's one of our larger bridges.
Yeah, that one and Main Street are our two larger. Some of the other ones are smaller.
Yeah, I think we need Adam to kind of like provide some details on that one for sure. That I think the maintenance one makes sense because we have seen some issues. Like I know at DPW, like there was discussions around like some of the foundation on some of those buildings, and then we're talking about the salt shed.
Yep.
I'm sure that around here, like you've had some issues on some of the buildings. We have
The fire
library,
station roof.
yeah,
Fire
the
station roof
fire
has
station
leaks.
roof.
Yeah, we have a leak in our foundation that we've had for years that we're monitoring. There's
The building
the
was.
soffits we're working on getting fixed that are leaking, and a few other things. So definitely listen. And what we learned from the school's direct experience was don't set them up by individual building. They had an issue where they set one for Bartlett and they set one for another school. They had an issue and they could not access any of the funds that were tied up for Bartlett for anything other than Bartlett. So they were just stuck in there. And the only reason, or the only way to close it would be to ask the voters to close it at town meeting. And then again, you have to wait for that year that they vote yes to completely close out before it comes available again for reappropriation in the following year. So
And it lapses the fund balance.
lapses fund balance, and then you ask the next year if you can move it somewhere else. So it's really best to have a little bit of a restricted scope, you know, facilities or something like that, but broad enough that you're not tied to just one building or one, you know, roof only or something like that.
So the police station, thinking about that, that's only really one location. Would that be to put a down payment on a bond as well?
It may be, before you even figure out what that bond is, you're gonna see the cost for engineering and plans are gonna be significant. So you may choose to do a portion out of that just to pay for the engineering and plans before you go for a bond. Or you could, it's almost like you're setting some money aside and then you're borrowing the rest of it. You can kind of do that combination of the two.
Right.
Okay.
And that's why we had also replacement or rehabilitation, because depending on what happens, future boards or whatever may choose something different. So until the project's done, we wanted to make sure that nobody's hands were tied.
And it also gives the police department a little bit of flexibility. If they go and ask for a bond multiple years in a row and it's denied, there potentially is still some money left over that they could use to take care of their employees over there. I know they have a lot of projects that continually just get pushed off because they're eventually thinking of a new building.
Okay.
Derek, can you give me that figure again for the extra 3% or so over the unassigned fund balance if we kept it at 10%?
It's about $2.1 million.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wrote that
Yeah.
down right.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that on my existing capital reserve list on page 44, I failed to list the new one. The library was established in 2026. So I just wanted to make sure that was on the radar.
Go ahead.
Would we ever consider another one for possibly the intersection of 114 there that we keep talking about, Rotary,
You may, after you start getting some traffic studies and
Yeah.
see, you do have a land acquisition fund, so if it requires any taking, that obviously intersection or road network stuff, you could do something like that. I think I would say that we have seen success with capital reserve funds when you start to define projects. The library went for a capital reserve fund and it failed. When they went their second time, they had a very detailed list of projects that they were looking to do, the estimated costs that they had for those, so.
And the town technology, would that smooth out some of the acquisition of like networking gear, that sort of thing?
It'd be mostly for the networking and the servers, that kind of thing, because those are big hits every 5 to 7 years, so it would be to try and do that. The other option, and we have talked about it, would be, and this is what the school did, is you go to a lease model where you're leasing those items.
So the school is leasing them right now?
Yes.
How much of an increase are they seeing every 3 to 5 years?
I don't know, I could reach out to them and get that information.
Do we get any money back when we get rid of the old gear? Do we sell it? Does it just,
Not on our side, because they've been fully beyond their life at that
we
point.
depreciated it completely?
Yeah.
Yep, and
There
then
were
they
5 years typically on that?
No,
Closer
no,
to 7.
7 or 8
7.
years, yeah.
We're
Okay,
usually beyond its
Yep.
serviceable life.
Yep.
okay.
So conceptually, we have to decide which, if any, reserve funds we want to create. And we have, if I understood that right, $2.1 million that potentially could be used to fund them. Some
fund
or
balance.
all of
From
them.
fund balance,
Yep.
yeah,
And we'd have to go through the warrant process to get there.
right.
Yes.
Okay,
I
so-
think it would be valid to discuss the priority of which ones you guys are most interested in potentially bringing forward, because that's something where we can go and work out example warrant article language to really flush out what that would look like. And then we can come back at that same time once we know are there a priority on 5 of them, 6 of them, 2 of them? Then we can come back with suggestions on maybe how to split out the money based on what we know for the scope of each of those funds. So for example, if you picked a town facility one and you picked the bridge replacement and whatnot, we'd be able to go back, do our research, find out how many bridges do we have, which town facility projects are on the line. And that way, when we come back, we can give you guys better, suggestions on ratios or whatnot of how to potentially split up the money if you're going to put it forward on warrant articles.
What would be in the vehicles one, the town vehicles?
So the idea on that one would be some of the larger vehicles. I know we're starting to move to a lease model
Yep.
for some of the DPW items, but not everything. They have a lot of specialized equipment, mobile equipment and other things they could potentially do through lease. But since that hasn't been switched over yet, we still have quite a big fleet across the department that would need to be maintained. And the idea is to kind of build a nest egg that can be added to if needed, and so that when you come to those replacements, you have the funding. The cruisers have been working out well, those are in the operating budget, but potentially, at some point in time, that could be switched over.
Well, we have a cycle on those, and I think we should probably exhaust any of the leasing or the financing on the ones and see how that goes before I actually start a CRF on, me personally, on those town vehicles.
Yep,
And we already have the fire apparatuses that are
right.
in there, so,
Yep.
I mean, you need a motion on any of these to,
Well,
I think it would be good, I think department heads a few meetings ago threw out their ideas. We refined them a little bit here, but at some point, we do need some direction from the board of what you're thinking for specific capital reserve funds. Then we can better formulate what those projects would look like over, a 5-year period and what type of funding would be necessary.
I think that town facilities one is highly necessary.
agree.
I mean, there isn't a building that we own that doesn't need something, help somehow. And they always seem to get pushed off.
I know we've talked about it, but the fact that Station 2 is in such a disarray, that would, to me, because we have people that sleep in there, people that cook there, stay there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to me, that would be my number one priority. Let's do something for that, to get that going, so that we'll be on target.
You mean for the town facilities, like
What was
collectively?
that?
You're saying the town facilities wouldn't make
Yes,
sense
yeah.
to you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think town facilities does make sense. I think for bridge replacement and rehabilitation, I think we have it coming up, but I think we really need to understand the cycle.
Yeah.
Coming up on that. Police station replacement and rehabilitation, I think that's good too, if we're gonna need some sort of like designs, those sort of things, because we need to plan that out.
Yeah, and that one we also know is another building that's long beyond its usable life from the design of what they built it for.
but the design you're talking about, that could be $500,000 just in that.
Either
Or
more.
more,
Yep.
closer to 2.
Yeah.
Is that,
Go ahead.
we've got 2, is that enough of a bite to start?
I think it's worthwhile kind of prioritizing them, so
I mean, if you've
I'm
got,
happy to talk
if you
through some of the
agree,
project ideas.
yeah, if you agree with those 3 high priority ones, we can flush those out further and bring those back to you and work with the department heads to kind of get, what do they see in the next 5 years that would potentially come from those.
I do agree with those 3. Me personally, the secondary priorities, I don't agree with the town vehicle. I would agree with the town technology.
Let's start with the top 3 then. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I think the bridges seem, unless we get more info that seems to change, I feel like that's the least of the 3.
I agree.
Personally.
Yeah.
So we need detail on that. So I guess what I'm hearing from you, Allison, is like you would go town facilities, police station, and then bridge.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, definitely.
And if we had to add one more,
Technology.
technology.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think with working
that
with
makes
those
sense.
4, we can bring back more detail and kind of
Great.
what a long-range plan and what potential funding would be. I will just make note that the Library Board of Trustees did meet earlier in August. They do anticipate that the Board of Trustees will be requesting an additional deposit into the Library Capital Reserve Fund, so you will have that as well. And we also have the Fire Apparatus Capital Reserve Fund. When the fire chief presented to CIP this year, he expressed the need to increase that from $350,000 to $450,000, again, because of the cost of the apparatus and what we have upcoming for future needs.
Well, I think we need some detail of that, whatever the library's planning on asking for when we go to the budget committee.
So they made a motion, it would be $90,000 next year, or for 2027, so that's what they're looking at, is $90,000.
And they did,
And they did talk
if it
about
was over
different.
5 years.
Yeah, and they did talk about different projects they'd be looking to do. They prioritized their top 6 projects.
Okay, 90,000.
So I think that what we're hearing so far is 450 for the fire. 90 for library is the request, doesn't mean that's what's gonna go in it. And then I think we need to work out whatever would go into these other
The new ones.
4.
Yep.
Yeah,
And then I think the other part of that decision, Derek and Danielle, that I'm hearing is, do we exhaust all of the 2.1, or do we kind of like say, hey, here's the plan for this year, and here's the plan for the next, because we should be thinking out collectively.
I would hang on to some of it, just in case. You never know what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I mean, you've got other options. If you put a little bit more money in this year, they start to build up that interest, and it just stays in that fund. But at some point, changing to the capital reserve the capital reserve model, you've got to, I think people are used to the fire apparatus, but it's always come from fund balance. The one time we asked for it to come from taxes, it failed.
Yeah.
So you've got to at some point transition and explain to voters that you're not always going to have the fund balance to.
Yeah, it's not gonna come from unassigned fund balance
Especially if
forever.
to keep it
Yeah.
at 10.
Correct.
At some point in time, it's gonna have to come from through taxation and planned taxation.
Yes.
and this actually may be a good transition year, because you do have the vote that happened at town meeting, pointing to that 10%, and, in recognition of that, if you were to recommend the 2.1 into these specific purposes, because at deliberative session as well, there was a lot of discussion from voters saying they want more capital reserve funds. And so if you kind of combine the two ideas, create and fund them, let them kind of get some momentum because they have a nest egg in each one to start that track, then when you go to the voters the following year, you're going to them with a realistic view of, okay, we don't have any excess accumulation of fund balance from decades. We have, this is what it was last year. What do we have for wiggle room, if any, to make any requests from fund balance?
I think we should have that discussion with the budget committee first, before anybody here makes a decision on that.
Sure.
And basically, Allison, like you will be forefront on some of that too, and like I'm on standby.
Well, I think.
You guys have a joint meeting
We have a
tomorrow.
joint meeting,
Joint meeting.
but somebody's gonna have to carry that torch collectively all the way through after we have that discussion. That, when we have that joint discussion, I think we should ask them, what are they all going to support and stand by?
Right.
Because like, this can't be just the select board making a recommendation, because the budget committee is gonna have to also stand by this as well.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Okay, do you need a motion?
No, I think we've
No.
got direction, clear direction from the board on this.
So, on I, speaking of, the agenda for tomorrow. Well, it's not.
There's nothing in your packet, but it's, does the board want to discuss, kind of what you're gonna hit with them? I think the one thing you can start is you can start with them of where you're going to be with fund balance. What you've seen in both the increase on the MS1, the valuation, as well as revenues. Right now, we feel, before we see the final meals and rooms numbers, it looks like the town tax rate is gonna have no increase. Because of those, again, increased revenues, as well as the new MS1. And then we'll see what we get from the state on that. So, traditionally, the select board has not used fund balance to reduce the tax rate, because what you're doing is, you're offsetting the town one, but what you're doing is you're supporting, I guess, both the school and county and the impacts. Traditionally, this board has not done this. It's used it to stabilize the town portion of the tax rate. But again, that's the choice that you need to make as a board.
So if we send it back, it basically helps the entire.
It helps the overall taxes, and you're helping the overall property taxpayers in the town. But you're also,
It's gonna be a one-time thing.
It's artificially reducing
You're-
the
you're-
tax
you're
rate.
Artificially reducing, so while other entities are, and I would invite you to look at the CBAs for the schools and the counties and see what, you know, what those employees are getting, and what you'd be doing is you'd artificially be hiding those increases.
Well, I think everybody assumes that we're part of that increase anyways.
Yeah.
Derek.
No, yeah, no, the tax
not.
bills get sent to 16 Main Street. We collect all the taxes, so we know about it all the time. There's been many years where the town's tax rate has been level, especially in COVID years. It was, the board used, I think one year was $1 million, another year was $750,000 to maintain the town's tax rate. But the overall tax rate went up because, again, the school and or the county added to it.
I think we have the county is going up.
Yeah, they're gonna go up about 10%.
Yeah. And so how much is that gonna cost the taxpayers here in town?
That'll be probably about 12 cents on the tax rate, so,
And I think the problem is, we don't have the range to absorb everybody else's increases. And when you look back, we have done that several times over the years, and I think that's part of what put us in this scenario. It's looking like the tax rate jumps the following year, because we were reducing the cost below, or the tax rate below what it should have been. So then when the next bill comes out, it looks like this giant increase, which has really been a problem. Additionally, in 2018, when we saw the return on the school side from the $10 million that they were over withholding, that had a very negative impact on escrow, because that artificially low tax rate made all the mortgage companies recalculate their escrow holdings, and people were then stuck holding the bag when that second bill came in, because the escrows had said, oh look, based on your bill, it's going down. And all of a sudden, people were like, wait, now I have to come up with not only enough to be able to pay my regular payment, but now I'm left with a bill from my escrow company to backfill. And that made for a major scramble.
So it's gonna go up 10% for county. I think I saw a pretty large number for the school because of the CBAs.
I don't have that
Don't
final
know.
number, because that will depend on their revenues, how much fund balance they returned at the end of fiscal year '26. So you're gonna see a more complete picture in about, probably not your September 28th meeting, probably your first meeting in October. That's when we'll really have a draft tax rate.
So what happens, so they take that money and they're returning it. What happens with the money that they return?
They don't actually
return it. They collect less for the next year. They don't bring a check to us. They collect less, because what it does
Right.
is it offsets the following year's tax collection.
However, the increase in their budgets year over year that we've seen has actually more than absorbed that, and they're still collecting more the following year in the tax effort. So we have tax effort data sets that we've been tracking to try to see how much is actually collected year over year.
So they don't actually return it, so
They don't know.
what happens with it, with the extra that they have?
They hold on to
hold
it, and then they collect less.
And then they collect less than what they would actually,
They would have to collect. So for
Yeah.
instance.
but they're still collecting more.
Yes.
Well, because their appropriation has grown,
Yes.
because they're.
So if you look at, say, and when you say the next year, it's really kind of the current year. So this year's town meeting in March is the budget that they're using for this September into next July. And at the end of June, when they go through their accounting and they find out where everything stands, they're gonna come up with a number that they're going to return. I use that with quotes only because, as we said, it doesn't actually leave or move. But the school's going to make that determination. During their budget process, they told us that they anticipated returning at least $2 million. So if we use that just as an example for discussion's sake, $2 million, if their total appropriation was $58 million, now when we get to the second half of the tax bill, instead of collecting whatever's needed to get to 58 million, we're collecting whatever's needed to get to 56 million. 56 million, though, may still be 2 million or 3 million more than the prior year.
Got it.
Did we lose interest on $2 million for a certain amount of time?
So no,
Well, no.
we never, those funds are maintained by the school.
They never come to us.
And they,
Yeah.
and they have they have an interest revenue line that offsets what they have to collect in
Yeah.
taxes.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the meeting, you're asking what should we discuss?
I would like to have all five of us clear on what I mean, they're gonna do what they wanna do, but I think we should have some topics that we all, are
So
aware of, and we can go in with bang, 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 bang.
based on the notes from your prior meeting in May, we posted the agenda with the agreed upon notes from the two chairs, which was a target increase for the budget preparation for '27. Item B was priorities of the boards, and then the proposed capital reserve funds. I think we have good marching orders on the proposed capital reserve fund. I know the board talked about some target increase, so I think that's a discussion with the budget committee as well. Other priorities, obviously, is more open, and I know Derek had sent some talking points, which would be good to review now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you guys look at the talking points?
Yeah, I did, but I don't have them here.
Yeah, so basically, we're gonna review some of the things that are coming. Specifically like the county tax, those sort of things, right?
Yeah, so what I set it up was kind of a review of 2026, give them a projected tax rate. I think on the town side, because where we are with revenues, a no increase, a projected no increase on the town side, that's great. And I think you really should highlight that, but I think you also need to talk about the impacts of the 2026 default budget, some of those cuts that went through, and kind of how you've monitored and dealt with that throughout. And then kind of finish up with where you see that you're gonna be with fund balance as you get to tax rate setting. And then you could almost shift into what you're gonna talk about for 2027, what marching orders you've given to the department heads, and what kind of capital reserve funds you're trying to set up for long-term budgeting and long-range planning.
Yeah, I see that in the impacts, Derek, that you had details around that we had to cancel, like police night, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there was a transfer of funding from the CIP to bolster fire overtime. Again, one of the things that we heard on election night in town meeting, we heard from some budget committee members of, well, that's all right, non-union employees, you guys still get a step or COLA. It's no, non-union employees on the town side saw no wage increase, while they also took on, for those that take health insurance, saw increases to their health insurance costs. So I think that's important to hammer home with them, and then just some of the other budget transfers that you've been kind of monitoring as you're going through the season.
Yeah, I'd also heard that from one of the school board members saying that you guys will be okay. Because they said that we had that in our default budget, and I had to explain to them no. So yeah, I think we should be very clear about that impact. Some of the things that we have been lagging for sure. I like the discussion around the fund balance. I think one of the discussion was how hardline are we gonna be specifically on budget goals, like the 5% versus 7%, I think you guys asked that. I think we have more clarity now on that 5%, which was operational budgets, not capital, right?
Yep.
So, do we think if we have, increases this year, let's just say a 1.5% COLA adjustment or something like that, that we would be in that 5% range without the capital?
So again, we're just finishing up the personnel numbers for next year. One of the tricky things is we're not gonna get our health insurance numbers until the second week of October. So you will have already received a budget, and we can make an assumption on what we're gonna get for health insurance numbers, but we really don't know what we're gonna have for health insurance numbers. The good thing is they have their hearing in September, so we get a kind of a sneak idea of where the big group is. We just don't know what our exact rate is within that group.
So I think on the budgeting, one of the things that we should talk about is that we've given the recommendation between 5 and 7.5 being basically the must-have, 7% basically being all those pieces. I think we should be separating out capital expenses from operational expenses and explain the difference between those
Okay.
with them for sure. I know that there's discussion around the big $2 million line item in Adam's budget. I know that's a point of discussion with them. That we're going to move some of those items around, kind of like what you've already done with the bridge, where you're basically putting that into the right line?
So we have the bridge one established, so that's gonna be separating out from the road plan,
But still in CIP.
but still in CIP.
Yeah.
Yep, and, Adams was gonna be working through the other request to reevaluate the costs for road reconstruction versus overlays. So we haven't received a request to change the account structure yet, but I'm hoping more information to come from that as we continue through the process in
So
September.
we should at least let them know that we're headed down that path. I think that on the vehicle leasing program, I don't think it's just leasing, I think that we've looked at multiple models, so,
Leasing and financing.
leasing and financing. I think one of the questions that will come up from at least one of the members, if not multiple, is that how did we look at the leasing program over time? Because some of them have done leasing where it's like over an extended period of time, not just like 3 years, it's actually like 7 years. And they're also going to bring up the fact that that like uplifting the vehicle is also part of that leasing model as well. It's not a capital expenditure for them in the programs that they've used. So we may get some feedback on that.
Okay.
So we should expect that, I think. But we just talked about the CRF, so I think we can talk about those ones that we're recommending.
Yeah, I can definitely modify the talking points and resend that out to everyone.
Okay, good.
Okay. And then I think we should make sure that based upon the CRFs and, you know, the recommendations there around using the unassigned fund balance, I think that would be good. We may even want to talk about that we just changed the unassigned fund balance, so that way we don't have that target in there anymore.
Yep, yeah, we can make that modification.
I don't know, Allison, Mark?
Yeah, related to that, I actually wanted to ask, the CRFs and the unassigned fund balance are both deposited in interest-bearing accounts. Do they earn the same rate of interest?
So it's going to depend on the investment option. So currently, they happen to be at the same interest rate. The town holds the unassigned fund balance in New Hampshire PDIP, the Public Deposit Investment Pool, and the trustees of the trust fund utilize that same investment option for the CRFs because they don't have the ability to put them into stocks where the value could go below.
Right.
So that's where they're housed right now.
And that unassigned fund balance is very cyclical with our taxes, you know, coming in and not.
Yep.
Whereas the capital reserve funds, they're deposited there unless you're taking money out of it.
Right.
And it just sits there. and
Right.
grows.
Right.
That kind of, it leads into two separate points. First being, there's kind of an attitude out there that, say we're, you know, the difference between 10 and 12% represents, you know, $2 million, you know, based on the discussion earlier, that if we didn't use that $2 million for 10 subsequent years to reduce the tax rate, that we've missed $20 million of opportunity to reduce the tax rate, but actually that this would be a one-time deposit.
Correct.
You have your one-time deposit and you'd be collecting, you know, hundreds of thousands, whether it's 100, 200, every year in perpetuity.
Yes.
Right, and then the other point, which is that we did receive that vote to move the fund balance policy to 10%, but that this would present a way to strategically protect that interest that we've been earning while still representing the will of the voters. Because there is also an attitude on the budget committee of never supporting anything that comes from unassigned fund balance. You know, so strategically communicating that benefit is going to be important.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, I know cash flow isn't something that we've gone into excessive detail on a regular meeting basis, but when people kind of think about fund balance, they think that, you know, $12 million or whatever, the 12%, $9 million in this case, is sitting in a bank and it's just $9 million and it's just always there and it's just always earning money, and that's not the case. As Derek was indicating, it's cyclical. So after we get tax collection in July, it may be $13 million sitting there, but then it's getting drawn down every single month, and by the time we get to the next tax collection, there may be only $1 million in there. So it really is, the interest is big at that, 1 or 2 months, and then it goes back down again, and it's still collecting interest, but obviously, as that principal balance is sinking lower and lower and lower down to, 1.5, 2 million, 1 million, you're running into much lower interest in those months, and then the next collection happens and it goes back and kind of starts
What's
again.
the lowest we've ever had that account?
1.5
When was that?
last year. Actually, it happened again in July.
It happens.
It happens every single
Happens
July and
every
every single
single-
December.
Yep. It's why our finance office works extremely hard. It's great that we have a great partnership with the school, that they are thoughtful about when they request funds for us. They actually sit down and work with the finance office about when they're going to take those out, and they're very timely with their forms that go to DRA. I think last year we were one of the first 10 communities in New Hampshire that had their tax rate set, so that we can get those taxes out timely in the fall.
And to that point, I remember when I first became finance director in 2019, and I had that discussion with the school as they were projecting out the rate at which they wanted their funds distributed, because it could be 2 million, 3 million, 4 million in a single month, depending on what they have planned for capital projects over the summer or other things like that. And I actually got on a meeting with the business administrator and their accountant at the time, and I explained everything, and then I logged into the banks, and the first comment I got was, "Oh my God, that's all you have is $1 million? So if I ask you for $2 million tomorrow, you'd have to take out money in borrowing?" And I said, "Yes, that's exactly right." And it was kind of a shock, because even the school didn't realize they had more in their cash flow with the way their funds go through the year and the way that their fund balance is retained. So,
Okay, I just did some quick math. And if we have 2.1 million less in unassigned fund balance, assuming we put all this into CRF, and you've gotten as low as 1.5 every single time, we're gonna be negative $500,000 twice.
I think what you're gonna have to do is, in our purchasing policy, it's very clear about large capital purchases. So what you may be doing is, we're really gonna have to work with department heads on some of those large capital purchases on when they're timed. You're also going to be looking for, rather than seeking out a discount and paying before you get an item, we're just gonna have to be more thoughtful of that. I know 20 years ago, when fund balance was down around 6%, because this is a policy that was adopted in 2007, and it was specifically because fund balance was only around 6%. They were very, okay, yep, because a lot of departments, hey, we made it through town meeting, we've got our appropriation. They want to hit the ground running, and you've got to kind of time those things out.
yeah, especially when it takes time for construction of items that we're buying. If a vehicle takes months to come in, they want to get those orders in so that they're not last in line on that delivery date. Luckily, you don't necessarily have to pay on day one, but it does depend on what's worked out in the contract.
Well, I think that's why I like what the chief has done, where he didn't pay up front on that last one. I think we're gonna have to be thoughtful on those things. It's also why I think that, the director of DPW needs to break some of those lines out. We need to understand what capital expenditures are gonna be. Like, we're gonna have to get really nitty gritty on some of those things, because just watching how much we've spent on the bridge alone has, given me some real insight, that we're gonna be spending a certain amount of money, we need to plan this appropriately.
I think if we look back at paving as well, Adam can speak to the cycle that we've seen with the cost of construction, but we're very used to, on the finance side, seeing a bill from Continental for $1.5 or $2 million just for pavement.
Right.
Right at
So,
the end of the year.
Yeah,
At the end of the year, yeah, so
and that eats up the majority of that.
So is there a way that we can work out a plan with them where we're paying a certain bit of time? Is there anything that we can do around that?
Yeah, I think we've got some pretty good controls in process, and we work very well with all the other departments about that. So there hasn't been a Cash flow has not been as big a concern.
But I do agree with Allison, like if 1.5 has been the minimum in there, like definitely not gonna be able to take out 2.1, like it's,
Now, to be clear, that's on the investment account. We do maintain an operating account as well, so there is some other liquidity in there as well.
how much liquidity is that, what's the lowest that's gotten down to?
2. The lowest I've seen is 2 in
At the
that.
same time as the 1.5?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it does keep us afloat on our side, and we do work with the school, so they know our cycle now, and they give us their draft plan for distribution so that we can actually review it against our cash flow for the year and let them know, hey, you guys may prefer to have 4 million in a certain month, but that's gonna be tight for us, so they may make that month 3, and then the next month immediately following tax collection, they may ask for 5 or 6. And so by partnering in that way, we've been able to kind of ride the wave accordingly.
So they have capital expenditures too?
They do.
Yep.
And they do a significant amount of them in the summer, from what I understand, as well as they have payouts to, say, teachers that decide to take their payments over the school year and not in the summer, or things like that. So the end of the year for them is a big one.
Okay.
Okay? We're good? Okay, tab J.
Yeah, tab J, what you have is you have 3 sets of draft ordinances in response to the unauthorized encampments on town property. You have a camping on public property ordinance, you have a fires and cooking on public property ordinance, and you have campers and recreational vehicles on public property ordinance. All 3 have been sent out to, for legal review. We have not received that back as of yet, and the departments have looked at these and provided feedback. We did have some questions. The camping on public property ordinances were largely based off both the Manchester and Nashua ordinance. The biggest difference between those is Nashua provides a warning period before coordinated enforcement and removal of items on public property. They provide 15 days posted and verbal notice before an unauthorized encampment is broken down. So I guess the question for the board is, do you want any waiting period? Do you want that left to the discretion of the police department as they're doing that? So I guess that's the first question I have for the board.
I think 15 days is too long. Over 2 weeks, no.
I was gonna go with 7 days myself.
I would be way more comfortable with 7 days than,
And the other thing is you may not wish to have this written into ordinance. You
Correct.
may wish to not include it in the ordinance, but then you could revisit this and just kind of talk to the police chief and just say it's really the board's desire to do this. But there may be some instances where you do not want to give notice because it's such a issue of public safety and public health.
And Manchester does not have a notice period?
They do not.
I don't think we should do
then
it.
yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Does Salem have one of these too?
I did not find one, but I kind of really looked at those. Those were the 2 newest ordinances.
So if we don't put anything in there, the police would still have a discretion to give them some time and things.
Yes. Yep.
Because some people are legitimately down and out, and I
Yep.
don't want them,
Yeah.
I'd like to give them some consideration too, but I don't want to be taken advantage of either, and, or put the police in danger by giving them notice. I don't know how that would work, but, so,
Yeah, the
Yeah,
board, you know, what you could do is once these ordinances are in effect, you could adopt a policy that goes along with it of, this is what we want to see for notice, that those, people in those situations are given some type of warning, and, what would suffice.
yeah, because I think that's probably the time of most danger, if you come in with no notice and, then people get angry and that's, you're taking my home and, things can get dicey. So,
Escalated.
yeah, so I want to be considerate of that a little bit,
Yeah, but the police can probably
yeah.
make a pretty good judgment call on that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Brad, no, I'm comfortable with that.
You know with that? Okay. I had a question, Derek, on that last line under the proposed ordinance section. it says the zoning ordinance prohibits the use of campers and recreational vehicles on private property for living? Is that,
That's correct.
that's correct?
So this is the draft campers and recreational vehicles. This is really on public property. This would be if somebody all of a sudden parked their RV in town hall parking lot or in a public right of way. It's already regulated by the zoning ordinance, and our code enforcement officer, with the help of the police department, can enforce already under the land use statutes. But the select board does have the ability to actually regulate the use of public property. So whether it's a parking lot, the public right of way, or town property.
But this is a private property also. Is it already in that, are you saying?
So in the zoning ordinance deals with land use, so it deals with the private property.
Okay.
This would kind of dovetail in with that.
Okay.
Are there any areas where camping may be okay already in town?
So the way we wrote the camping ordinance is that it is, go to it, I think we did put in,
You could ask for permission.
you could
right?
ask for
You can
permission.
submit for permission
And
to
we
do it.
have had the select board grant permission, the scouts.
The Scouts,
I was
that's
just
what I'm
gonna say
asking.
Scouts.
Yeah, and they have used that, so,
I saw that in there.
yeah.
So the formal process right now is they have to come to the select board to ask for that?
Yep, absolutely. They come to them and then they coordinate with the fire department to get a fire permit.
We haven't had any other requests from anybody?
We have not.
Okay. You need a motion on this to
Wait a
remove?
second, there's a typo on page 48,
Okay?
Roman numeral 4. I think the second line, with, at the last word on, with should be without, I think.
Okay, yep.
There's two separate ordinances though, correct?
There's three.
Three.
There's three. We felt that it was appropriate to do camping on public property, fire and cooking on public property, and campers and recreational vehicles on public property. They're all related, but you may have some instances where you're only seeing one of those activities.
And I had to add one other one, Roman numeral 5 on the same page, 48, and second to the last line, I think select board or its designee.
Yep,
It's-
okay.
Okay, that's it.
That's for the firing, too?
Yeah.
Yes, fire and cooking.
Yes.
Yep.
But these are still going through legal, right?
These are still going through legal for review. The request would be for the board to, if this is something that you still want to consider adoption, it requires 2 public hearings, 10 to 21 days apart, with an adoption vote 10 to 21 days after the second public hearing. So if the board were to vote tonight, we would schedule this for public hearing on September 14th. My hope is we would have legal review back. We can make some minor edits based on what legal says and bring those to public hearing.
I think we should eliminate the days on the first ordinance, which is the camping one.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
On the cooking one, again, like, would people be able to cook by, like, Glen Lake or other places, or is this just basically now?
So I guess
lifestyle?
that's the question for the board. Right now, we don't really enforce or go after that. You do have the fire department here that can speak to any concerns they may have. I did talk to Parks and Rec. We don't have any of those, like charcoal grills that are stationary that anybody can come use. We do not have that. Somebody would have to bring in there
By Glen Lake?
at any parks.
Okay, so we don't have them anywhere, at
Correct.
Roy or
Correct.
Barnard, nothing?
Correct.
I think that's a discussion on the fire thing, like,
There's only one thing I wanna change, and that's going from 15 to 7 days. 15 days is a long time, there's a lot can happen. Let's,
I think we're talking about
Yeah,
getting rid of that.
we're gonna get rid of that line
Get rid of
altogether and leave it at the discretion of the police.
Let the police determine what's proper.
Right.
can we ask Chief his opinion on some of the fire?
Yeah, it's all right, I'm gonna set up Captain Lloyd, this is his
expertise.
All right, Captain LaVoy.
Please be prepared. Be ready to talk.
Evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
I think it's the first time I've sat before you, so hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Do I need to introduce myself?
Yeah.
Okay. Tim LaVoy, Director of Community Risk Reduction for the Goffstown Fire Department.
Thank you.
What questions can I answer?
What's your opinion on the fire ordinance and allowing people to actually have like barbecues or otherwise, like Glen Lake or one of the parks? Because me personally, growing up, like that was one of the things we used to go do. We used to sit down, have a barbecue, sit down and eat.
Certainly. Yeah, I think this topic is something that requires kind of a comprehensive approach from the board. I see risk since I manage it. I see, there's 4 different ways to deal with risk: avoid it, reduce it, transfer it, or absorb it, retain it. I think that balance of having that socially available to folks with difficulties in managing it from an enforcement side. But with that being said, you see the charcoal pits in state parks, everywhere. But there's also usually a park ranger that's assigned there for the day. So I think it's a balance between, also liability as well on the town with somebody getting injured from those fire pits. And then as well, if the fire reaches private property, it's also could be on the hook for damages to said private property. So it's a balancing act in what you really want to do.
Well, we don't have fire pits there now, is what I'm hearing.
Correct.
But
But if
somebody-
you were to introduce it,
I don't think anybody here is like saying, let's go put a fire
No.
pit in. But what if somebody brings a portable, propane stove or something like that?
yeah, I think your risk is fairly minimal with that.
So it's the bigger would be the open flame.
But open flame
Yeah,
cooking is a
starting a
different
fire
story.
and-
Yep.
At Glen Lake.
Well, it says fires and cooking on town property.
Yeah. Propane, portable propane grills used following the, manufacturer's suggested use, is that okay? The fire department may not wish to have, charcoal briquettes, because if you just leave it there and,
Yeah, it has to be put out, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, any open burning, you have to follow the state requirements. So at that point, you've got to have something to put the fire out with next to you. Somebody has to be in attendance at all times. And I don't really foresee every single person who would do that to actually follow through with all those requirements. Even folks we issue to permits to do campfires in their backyards, we find don't follow the state rules all the time.
I think that makes sense on like them starting like wood fires, charcoal fires, those sort of things. Would you recommend that if we allowed like a small portable propane cooking stove, that they're also required to have an extinguisher or something on hand?
I would not be opposed to that. I don't, the chief is the AHJ, but I know he defers to me, but I would not be opposed to that.
Because then it puts some liability on them, that they have to follow those
But
pieces
I think you have to spell it out very carefully and clearly in the ordinance.
in the ordinance.
You give out permits now?
We only give out permits for open burning, and that's wood, things of that.
on private
On private
property.
On private property. Public property, no permits, anything, nothing like
Do
this.
you guys see any of this? Like, have you seen anyone using a charcoal
No.
grill or anything else at Glen Lake?
No, I think this stems really.
We had one incident.
Okay.
One incident.
Yep,
Open, was
They
it
just left it there.
open flame or gas grill?
Charcoal.
charcoal.
They bought it.
And then
used
just left it?
And left it.
Sounds right.
So this ordinance says that on public property, it's unlawful to use, cook, kindle, et cetera, without the express permission of the Goffstown Select Board or its designee. So that would mean we'd start a system of, if somebody wants to have a cookout at Glen Lake, they'd have to get a permit first.
Yes.
I feel
We
like
assume
there's,
you would be our designee, I suppose.
I feel like
That seems
there's
like an
not
awful onerous,
that much activity of this. Like, there aren't even picnic tables at Glen Lake, so it's not like you're gonna have a whole family of 10 people showing up to grill and eat. You literally have to bring your lawn chairs, and there's like 10 feet of shorefront there that everybody squishes in. I just am wondering if we're overanalyzing it because it's not an issue. I know what you're
Yeah.
saying, we
I'm
don't
not
wanna
just
like.
thinking about Glen Lake, I'm thinking about Roy Park and Barnard, because there are tables out there, people do go sit out there. Like, people use that under area over at Barnard, basically celebrate, have a good time sometimes.
and if we required a permit, would that mean every time you wanted to do that, you had to get another permit? Yeah?
I think so.
Well,
Yep,
You can't get a
correct.
What do you think about it?
They're gonna do it whether they wanna do it or not, whether it's, you've got a permit, they're gonna do it. Let them do it, get a permit, and I think it's fine. Pick up your mess, clean it up, and leave it better than how you found it.
So again, these draft ordinances came out of the issue with unauthorized encampments.
Right.
Encampments.
If the board wants to adopt, so right now, there is a facility use process. If you're going to use Roy Park or Barnard Park, the pavilions,
Yes,
you really, we have a facility use policy that says you need to be reserving that with Parks and Recs. We could make, a propane grill as part of that process. And so, we could put in wording that this does not override the facility use policy if somebody has a proper facility use permit for those locations.
I'm good with
That
that
would be
there.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
But I don't think we have one for the waterfront. The waterfront is,
There's not a lot of space there, I honestly don't know if I want people grilling over there anyways, like, that
There's
could,
a lot of pine,
There's so,
yeah.
it's so close.
it's so much pine, and like, I'd be worried about people getting hurt in some way, shape, or form, because there's not a lot of beach area over there.
And nobody's doing it, so.
okay, we can make that modification.
And the last one?
And then the last one is the use of recreational vehicles, campers on public property. Again, this is really for a person occupying, storing, or parking and remaining in those, really living out of a camper on public properties or public right of ways.
So would there be any fines associated with any of these at some point in time?
It would fall under the criminal code, and the police department
It's
would
in-
have to, it's under the penalties, but I believe it goes up to $1,000 under
Violation.
yeah, for a violation.
So you need a motion, so that way we can take this to public hearing?
Yes, please.
I'll make a motion to take these ordinances to public motion, or public
Hearing.
hearing, thank you. And with the modifications as discussed tonight.
Second.
Okay, motion by Josh, second by Allison. Any further comments?
Just one more thing I just want to make sure I point out so the board's aware. In 2026, there was House Bill 1091 that was brought up, and this pertained to any towns, because of the city of Grants Pass versus Johnson case law out of Oregon regarding the local authority to remove encampments. There was a big push in New Hampshire for ordinances to, towns must offer an optional penalty other than monetary fines for people that they're displacing out of encampments, such as community service and things like that. It died in committee, but I just want to make you aware that there was a big push for that, so we may need to adjust at some point for something other than monetary fines.
But that's not New Hampshire law now.
Not yet.
No, it died in committee, correct.
Yeah.
It died in committee, but I mean, I also don't think, if those people are in encampments anyway, I don't think they're
You're not
walking
gonna get
around with a ton of
your
money.
Right.
So,
That's why it's there.
yeah, so do we have in our ordinance that states that we can just remove them and not give them a fine?
So today, there is a law on the books that it is up to the governing body to allow camping on public property.
Right.
And there's no discussion of fines. So the police could go down there and remove, say, that they're camping on public property without authority of the governing body, and there'd be no fines for
And
that.
then there's no fines.
Yeah.
So that is the other option. So we don't need to do community service, because quite frankly, I don't think
No,
I want to
thank
put either the chiefs or anybody else responsible for setting up community service on that front.
Going to be our newest firefighter.
Can we direct them towards the county? Do they?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. There's a motion on the table, and I think we've heard everything. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
And continuing on the subject matter at page 52 of your packet, the board did direct department heads, so thank you to Rick as well as Eric and Adam for working on this. They did get a quote for the estimated job cost to clean up the encampment. So I guess I would be looking for a board motion to move forward with this encampment cleanup.
Have they been removed already?
They have not, well, the items have not. I know that it's ongoing. I know that Rick said he was over there last week and saw people, walking around.
So this is just the removal of the items.
This would be removal of the items and letting any occupants know that, again, you have that existing no camping on public property. If they would need to move along.
So will we issue this after we do the acceptance?
No, I think you would want to move this, I think you would want to do the encampment cleanup now. You've got soccer and other sports starting over at those fields here now that school's getting back in session. So that's something that-
Where's the money coming from?
Can we worry about that later? I mean, I think
All right.
we do have a public health line that falls under the fire department. We can also find some other locations and suggest that.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to expend, and I'm gonna say up to $4,500 for the removal of the encampment. Yeah.
Okay, motion by Josh, second by Richard. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
And that's all I had for the town administrator's report.
Thank you.
That's it.
That's it.
That's- Okay, any old business?
Yes, on the committee that we assigned for the police station,
Yeah.
I'm on two different boards and committees, and the question has come up at both of them about what will be the hours for the meeting of that committee for the police station, because many of them are not going to be able to do it during the day. So I don't know if those hours have been determined yet or not, but I think clarity needs to be given on that. I think on both of those, they said the night would be preferred. However, I know at least on the planning board side, there was 2 volunteers. One could do during the day, the other could do at night, but the Economic Development Council, I think they were looking for an evening piece on that.
Okay, I think the way the board set up the, that particular ad hoc committee is the police chief would be the chair of that committee, and he would set the meeting dates and times.
So I think
So
we
I
need
can-
to.
I can ask the police chief what he envisions that. We currently have it advertised on our website and have asked people to reach out to start submitting volunteer applications so that they can get started here.
I think he'll get more adoption from people outside of the town offices. If it could be an evening, or at least alternating when the meeting times would be, or whatever.
I'll pass that along to him.
Okay.
Okay, any new business? Okay, then let's move on to the action matrix. Any changes?
I don't believe so. You have a few changes in the vehicles for the most part.
So, Derek, I noticed last time that we met, there had been being repaired inside, being repaired outside. That's gone between last one and this one. I thought that was actually good that they were letting us know if it was being repaired by our maintenance team or somebody else's maintenance team.
So the first two, the 2 DPWs, you have one that's at reliable collision and one that's being repaired in-house. With the fire chief here, perhaps I can do that moving forward, but the fire chief can kind of let us know where tanker 1 and engine 1 are being repaired?
Tanker 1's back in service.
Okay.
Engine 1 is out for brake repair.
And that's outside of our DPW, like they're getting service someplace
It's going
else.
back for the springs that were ordered when it was there.
Okay.
So it's out of service right now.
And the one that's back in service, was that done in-house or outside?
I believe, let me pull that up, I believe it was mostly in-house.
Okay.
I can get that moving forward then.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, then I will open it up once again for public comment. Anybody here? Yes, ma'am. Would you state your name and your address, please?
Paula Bedard, 36 Shirley Park Road, Goffstown. So I serve on the board of the Friends of the Goffstown Rail Trail, and I just want to make a really brief comment about the discussion regarding cooking and camping on the rail trail, on the, town property, specifically in relation to the rail trail. I also noticed there wasn't any verbiage that talked about butane or propane cans or canisters, and I wouldn't feel comfortable seeing any of that kind of activity on the Goffstown Rail Trail. I appreciated hearing the discussion about how people felt about it at some of the parks, and that all made sense to me, but I personally, I don't think it would be a good idea to allow, and in the verbiage of the ordinances, we might want to add a little more clarity regarding the propane and/or butane canisters, and I would not be in favor of allowing those on Goffstown Rail Trail.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, not seeing anyone else, I will close public comment and look for a motion.
Make a motion to enter non-public session under RSA 91A, items A, 2A's, C, B, and L.
Motion by Richard,
I'm leaving.
Oh, we can leave it.
Second.
second
There
by
are other items.
Okay. Sorry.
I'll second that. Roll
motion
call.
by Richard, second by
Yes, sir.
Josh. Roll call vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
ayes have it.